For many of us who grew up in the mid-century South, the kitchen belonged to Mama or Grandma. It was the heart of the home, a place where food wasn't ordered through a glowing smartphone screen or delivered in a bag by a stranger. But in our fast-paced world of drive-thrus, instant apps, and pre-packaged convenience, those handwritten recipe cards are gathering dust in old tin boxes. Today, we are turning back the clock to reclaim 25 forgotten ground beef dishes that once graced every Southern supper table but have nearly vanished from the modern world. 1. The Porcupine meatball casserole. In the mid-1960s, long-grain white rice was a pantry staple, and stretching meat was an art form. The Porcupine meatball earned its name because, as the meat cooked, the uncooked rice mixed into the beef would expand and poke out of the sides, resembling little porcupine quills. Southern homemakers loved this dish because the rice effectively doubled the meat's volume. Ground beef was combined with minced onions, salt, pepper, and dry rice, shaped into compact balls and nestled into a deep baking dish. The magic, however, was the simmering liquid, a rich, sweet, and tangy mixture of Campbell's condensed tomato soup, a splash of water, and a dash of Worcestershire sauce. Baked covered for an hour, the rice absorbed the savory tomato juices, yielding incredibly tender meat and a built-in gravy that was famously spooned over soft buttered white bread. 2. Southern Johnny Marzetti. While named after an Italian immigrant's restaurant in Ohio, the Johnny Marzetti casserole migrated south in the 1950s and became a Monday night savior by the 1970s. This was the ultimate church potluck dish. It relied on a pound of ground beef browned alongside the Southern holy trinity of onions, bell peppers, and celery. Once drained, the beef was tossed with boiled elbow macaroni and bound together with condensed tomato soup and a can of stewed tomatoes. What made it distinctly Southern was the addition of a sharp, processed cheese, often shredded Velveeta or Kraft cheddar from a red wax block, stirred directly into the pasta before baking until bubbly. It was cheap, filling, and could feed an entire youth group after a long Sunday service. 3. Tomato gravy beef patties. Before the era of pre-made jarred pasta sauces, Southern cooks relied heavily on what they called tomato gravy. This wasn't a smooth marinara. It was a rustic, flour-thickened pan gravy made from meat drippings and canned tomatoes. For this meal, ground beef was seasoned simply with salt and black pepper, shaped into thick oval patties and seared in a screaming hot cast-iron skillet to develop a deep brown crust. Once the patties were removed, a couple of tablespoons of flour were whisked into the hot beef fat to create a roux. A can of whole peeled tomatoes, often put up from the summer garden, was crushed by hand into the skillet, juices and all. The patties were returned to the bubbling, savory tomato gravy to simmer until tender, always served over a mountain of fluffy, hot mashed potatoes. 4. Smoky barbecue beef cups. The late 1960s witnessed a massive surge in the popularity of refrigerated canned biscuits, particularly Pillsbury's introduction of Grandma's-style biscuits. This sparked a trend of using biscuit dough as a vessel for savory fillings. For barbecue beef cups, a muffin tin was greased, and individual raw biscuits were pressed down into each cup, stretching the dough up the sides to form a small pastry bowl. The filling was a highly seasoned mixture of browned ground beef, finely minced onions, brown sugar, yellow mustard, and Kraft hickory smoked barbecue sauce. A spoon of this sweet and smoky meat went into each biscuit cup, topped with a square of American cheese, and baked until the biscuit edges were golden brown and flaky. It was a staple of Friday night sleepovers and casual weekend lunches. 5. Old-fashioned beef and cabbage skillet. Resourcefulness was a prerequisite for any Southern home cook in the 1970s, especially during the economic inflation of the era. Cabbage was incredibly inexpensive, hearty, and lasted for weeks in the crisper drawer. This one-pot wonder, often called slumgullion or simply beef and cabbage skillet, began by browning ground beef with plenty of yellow onions and a pinch of red pepper flakes for a subtle southern kick. An entire head of green cabbage was chopped into thick ribbons and piled high directly on top of the meat. A can of tomato sauce or diced tomatoes was poured over the top. The lid was clamped down tightly and the heat was turned low. The cabbage steamed in the meat juices and tomato steam, turning sweet and tender, absorbing all the rich beef fat. 6. The shipwreck casserole. The name of this dish perfectly encapsulates its nature, a beautiful disaster of layers that somehow came together perfectly in the oven. It was popular in rural southern households because it required zero pre-cooking. Everything was layered raw into a deep casserole dish. The bottom layer consisted of thinly sliced raw potatoes, followed by a layer of sliced onions, a layer of seasoned, uncooked ground beef, a layer of raw long-grain rice, and a final layer of canned green beans or sliced carrots. To bind this wreck together, a can of cream of mushroom soup mixed with half a can of milk was poured over the top. Baked low and slow for 2 hours, the ingredients melded into a rich, comforting, interconnected meal where the potatoes became buttery and the beef perfectly steamed. 7. Mock filet mignon. In the 1960s, a real beef tenderloin or filet mignon was a luxury reserved for the wealthiest tables or the rarest of anniversaries. However, Southern homemakers were masters of culinary illusion. To treat their families to a fancy Sunday dinner on a budget, they created mock filet mignon. Lean ground beef was seasoned with onion powder, Worcestershire sauce, and an egg yolk for richness, then meticulously shaped into thick, circular cylinders that mimicked the exact shape of a high-end steak. To complete the illusion, a strip of smoky, thick-cut bacon was wrapped snugly around the perimeter of each beef cylinder and secured tightly with a wooden toothpick. These were seared in bacon fat in a cast-iron skillet and finished in the oven. When served on a good platter with a sprig of parsley, it felt like a night at an upscale steakhouse. 8. Southern creamed chipped beef. While traditional SOS or cream chipped beef relied on jarred, salty, dried beef sheets, many Southern kitchens in the 1960s adapted the recipe to use fresh ground beef, which was often more affordable and less intensely salty. The process was rooted in classic Southern gravy making. The ground beef was browned thoroughly, allowing the bottom of the skillet to develop a rich layer of fond. Instead of draining all the fat, flour was stirred directly into the beef and drippings to form a thick paste. Whole milk was poured in slowly while whisking constantly, creating a rich, thick, velvety white gravy studded with pieces of savory beef. Heavily seasoned with coarse black pepper, this hot gravy was ladled over toasted squares of white bread or split, day-old buttermilk biscuits. 9. Spanish rice skillet dinner. During the mid-century, the term Spanish in Southern cooking didn't refer to authentic cuisine from Spain or Mexico, but rather to any dish that prominently featured a combination of rice, bell peppers, and tomatoes. This skillet dinner was a Tuesday night regular because it cooked entirely in one pan, saving on washing up. Ground beef was browned with a generous amount of green bell pepper and sweet Vidalia onions. Uncooked white rice was then added directly to the pan and stirred for a few minutes to toast the grains in the remaining beef fat. Next, a large can of whole tomatoes, broken up with a wooden spoon, and a cup of beef broth were added. The skillet was covered and simmered until the rice was plump and red, having absorbed all the liquid, resulting in a savory, slightly sweet dish with a distinct nostalgic aroma. 10. Fiesta, beef pie with cornbread crust. As the 1970s progressed, Southern kitchens began embracing mild Tex-Mex influences, heavily adapted to local tastes. The Fiesta beef pie was a beloved manifestation of this trend. The filling consisted of ground beef seasoned with chili powder, cumin, and garlic, stretched with a can of drained pinto or kidney beans and a small can of sweet corn. this mixture was placed into a pie dish. The crowning glory was the crust, a classic unsweetened southern buttermilk cornbread batter poured directly over the hot meat filling. When baked, the cornbread batter rose to the top, forming a beautiful golden brown, crispy crust. Cutting into it revealed the steaming, savory beef mixture beneath, offering the perfect contrast of textures. 11. The 7-layer dinner. This was the ultimate set-it-and-forget-it oven meal of the 1960s, long before the modern slow cooker dominated kitchen counters. It was entirely about precision layering in a deep, greased baking dish, ensuring that each ingredient cooked perfectly in relation to the others. Layer 1 was sliced raw potatoes. Layer 2 was sliced yellow onions. Layer 3 was seasoned, uncooked crumbled ground beef. Layer 4 was rinsed, uncooked rice. Layer 5 was sliced carrots. Layer 6 was a can of sweet green peas. The final 7th layer was a generous pouring of condensed tomato soup or V8 vegetable juice over the entire assembly. Sealed tightly with heavy-duty aluminum foil, it baked for nearly 2 hours, filling the house with a rich, savory aroma as the vegetable juices slowly percolated down through the beef and potatoes. 12. Beef stuffed bell peppers with tomato glaze. Late summer in the South meant an abundance of green bell peppers from the garden, and stuffing them with ground beef was a brilliant way to utilize a bountiful harvest. The tops of the peppers were sliced off and the seeds carefully scooped out. The filling was a mixture of ground beef, parboiled rice, minced onions, and a splash of Worcestershire sauce. The peppers were stood upright in a baking dish, packed tightly so they wouldn't topple over. Before entering the oven, each pepper was topped with a thick spoonful of a simple glaze made from Heinz ketchup, a touch of brown sugar, and a splash of apple cider vinegar. As it baked, the peppers became tender and sweet while the meat filling stayed incredibly juicy under its glossy, caramelized red cap. 13. Deep dish hamburger pie. This recipe was a favorite featured in many community cookbooks, compiled by telephone pioneer clubs or church ladies' auxiliaries in the early 1970s. It wasn't a traditional pastry pie, but rather a comforting meat and potato assembly. A savory base of ground beef cooked with onions and a little flour was spread along the bottom of a pie dish, often enriched with a layer of canned green beans. The star of the dish was the topping, a thick, generous blanket of leftover mashed potatoes, whipped with butter and a splash of milk. The cook would use the back of a spoon to create decorative peaks and valleys in the potatoes, then sprinkle a little paprika or shredded cheddar over the top, baked until the potato peaks turned a beautiful, crispy golden brown. It was a visual and culinary masterpiece of thrift. 14. Sweet and sour meatloaf. Almost every Southern household had a standard meatloaf recipe. But the 1960s brought a wave of fascination with exotic flavors, leading to the creation of the sweet and sour meatloaf. The loaf itself was kept traditional: ground beef, crushed saltine crackers as a binder, milk, and an egg. However, the topping moved away from plain ketchup. Homemakers whipped up a glaze using brown sugar, apple cider vinegar, a spoonful of yellow mustard, and sometimes a dash of ground ginger or a splash of canned pineapple juice. This glaze was brushed over the meatloaf multiple times during the baking process, creating a thick, sticky, sweet, and tangy lacquer that beautifully cut through the richness of the ground beef. 15. The goulash pot, Southern style. While traditional Hungarian goulash is a slow-simmered beef stew seasoned heavily with paprika, the goulash that fed millions of Southern children in the 1960s and 70s was a completely different beast. It was a quick, comforting skillet meal born from the need to stretch a dollar. Ground beef was browned with onions, and then a mountain of cooked elbow macaroni was added to the pot. The dish was brought together with canned diced tomatoes, tomato sauce, and a touch of sugar to balance the acidity. It was seasoned simply with salt, pepper, and garlic powder. Left to simmer together until the macaroni absorbed the tomato broth, it became thick, comforting, and tasted even better the next day when reheated for a quick lunch. 16. French onion beef squares. As convenience foods expanded in the 1970s, canned French onion soup became a secret weapon for busy Southern mothers looking to add deep, savory flavor to ground beef without spending hours caramelizing onions. For this dish, ground beef was mixed with a can of condensed French onion soup, an egg, and crushed cracker crumbs or seasoned stuffing mix. The mixture was patted flat into a square baking pan and baked until firm. Once cooked, it was sliced into neat squares. The remaining juices in the pan, rich with the sweet onion flavor from the soup, were thickened with a little cornstarch slurry to create an instant, glossy brown onion gravy that was poured generously over the hot meat squares. 17. Beef and hominy skillet. Hominy, whole kernels of white or yellow maize dried and treated with an alkali, is a foundational element of traditional Southern foodways, but by the 1970s, canned hominy had become a pantry staple for quick suppers. This forgotten skillet combined a pound of ground beef browned with onions and bell peppers, drained, and then tossed with a can of drained golden hominy. The large, plump kernels of hominy provided a wonderful, chewy texture that contrasted beautifully with the ground beef. The dish was seasoned with salt, black pepper, and a dash of hot sauce, then simmered until everything was piping hot. It was a rustic, filling meal that spoke directly to the agricultural roots of the Deep South. 18. Cream of mushroom Salisbury steaks. Salisbury steak has a long history, but it reached its peak of popularity in the Southern home kitchen during the 1960s, heavily aided by the ubiquity of Campbell's cream of mushroom soup. Ground beef was shaped into oval, steak-like patties, often mixed with a bit of dried onion soup mix for extra flavor, and pan-fried until a deep crust formed. Instead of making a gravy from scratch, the cook would pour a can of cream of mushroom soup and a splash of milk or water directly into the skillet with the patties. The heat was lowered and the patties simmered in the soup, turning it into a rich, velvety mushroom gravy that perfectly complemented the beef. Served alongside white rice or mashed potatoes, it was the ultimate comfort food. 19. Smothered hamburger steaks with liver and onion-style gravy. For families who loved the deep, earthy flavor of traditional liver and onions but had children who refused to eat organ meats, Southern mothers devised this clever alternative. Ground beef patties were seasoned heavily with black pepper and seared in bacon grease. A massive mountain of sliced yellow onions was added to the pan, cooked down slowly until dark, sweet, and caramelized. A brown gravy was constructed right in the skillet using the pan drippings, flour, and beef broth, heavily simmered until the onions became completely soft and integrated into the sauce. The hamburger steaks were smothered in this rich, sweet onion gravy, delivering all the nostalgic comfort of a diner classic right at the kitchen table. 20. The Calico squash and beef casserole. In the agrarian South, summer brought a deluge of yellow crookneck squash and zucchini, leading to creative ways to incorporate these vegetables into every meal. The Calico casserole combined sliced yellow squash, sliced zucchini, and browned ground beef layered in a baking dish, creating a beautiful mosaic of yellow, green, and brown. The binder was often a mixture of sour cream, an egg, and a bit of grated cheddar cheese to keep things rich. The top was dusted with a thick layer of crushed Ritz crackers tossed in melted butter. When baked, the squash became perfectly tender. The meat anchored the dish with savory richness, and the Ritz cracker topping provided a buttery, salty crunch that defined mid-century Southern casseroles. 21. Baked beef and noodle kugel, Southern style. While kugel has its roots in traditional Jewish cuisine, a unique sweet and savory version found its way into many Southern recipe boxes in the 1960s, often served at holiday gatherings or large family buffets. This dish combined cooked wide egg noodles with browned ground beef, cottage cheese or sour cream, and eggs. What gave it a distinctly Southern twist was the addition of a touch of sugar, a dash of cinnamon, and a handful of raisins stirred into the beef and noodle mixture before baking. The result was a fascinating complex flavor profile where the savory beef was elevated by the warm spice and subtle sweetness, baked until the top noodles became delightfully crispy. 22. The Texas Hash Casserole. Despite its name, Texas hash was a beloved staple across the entire South throughout the 1970s. It was a brilliant way to use up leftover cooked white rice. A pound of ground beef was browned with large chunks of onion and green bell pepper. Once cooked, it was tossed with the cooked rice, a can of diced tomatoes, and a generous amount of chili powder, garlic salt, and a touch of cumin. The mixture was transferred to a baking dish topped with slices of sharp cheddar cheese or American cheese and baked until the cheese was melted and slightly browned around the edges. It was hearty, smoky, and perfectly captured the rustic, no-nonsense approach to Southern family cooking. 23. Beef and potato salad casserole. Hot potato salad has a long history in the South, but during the mid-century, some adventurous home cooks decided to turn it into a complete main course by integrating ground beef. Cubed potatoes were parboiled, then tossed with browned ground beef, crumbled cooked bacon, minced celery, and hard-boiled eggs. The dressing was a warm, tangy mixture of mayonnaise, a splash of yellow mustard, apple cider vinegar, and a pinch of sugar. The entire mixture was transferred to a baking dish, topped with a few more bacon crumbles, and baked just until hot and bubbly. The result was a rich, tangy, incredibly comforting dish that combined the best elements of a summer picnic with a hearty winter supper. 24. The kraut and beef skillet. In the mountainous regions of the South, such as the Appalachians, preserving cabbage via fermentation was a winter necessity, making sauerkraut a deeply familiar flavor. This simple skillet meal combined a pound of browned ground beef and onions with a well-drained can or jar of sauerkraut. A grated tart apple or a spoonful of brown sugar was often stirred in to mellow the sharp acidity of the kraut. The mixture was seasoned with caraway seeds or just plenty of coarse black pepper and simmered together until the flavors wedded beautifully. It was a rustic, tangy, deeply savory dish that provided warmth and sustenance during the cold winter months, utilizing simple ingredients that kept perfectly in the pantry. 25. The imperial hamburger loaf. We close our journey with a dish that represented the peak of 1960s entertaining elegance, the imperial hamburger loaf. When a Southern homemaker wanted to host a nice bridge club luncheon or a formal Sunday dinner without spending a fortune on a prime rib roast, she turned to this recipe. Lean ground beef was mixed with fine breadcrumbs, milk, eggs, and minced parsley, then pressed into a decorative metal ring mold or bundt pan. Once baked and unmolded onto a silver platter, it formed a beautiful, stately ring of savory meat. The hollow center of the ring was then filled to the brim with creamed peas and pearl onions, or a rich mushroom gravy. It was a stunning visual presentation that proved, with a little Southern grace and creativity, even humble ground beef could be fit for royalty. As we close that old tin recipe box tonight, it's hard not to feel a twinge of nostalgia for the era these dishes represent. Those 25 recipes weren't just about survival or convenience. They were about a time when the dinner bell meant something profound. It meant the entire family stopped what they were doing, washed their hands, and sat down together at a physical table. The world has changed, and it has changed fast. But those flavors don't have to be lost to history. The next time you're wondering what to make for supper, skip the delivery app. Dust off that cast iron skillet, pull out a pound of ground beef, and recreate one of these forgotten Southern classics. Bring those aromas back into your home, share them with your children and grandchildren, and keep those memories alive. Thank you for walking down memory lane with us tonight at Nostalgia Calling. Until next time, pull up a chair, cherish your loved ones, and keep those old recipes cooking.